All right, guys, we are back with another seminar. And for those of you guys in the local area, man, if you're into crappie fishing, or really pretty much any fishing on Weiss or Neely, Lee Pits is always full of some great knowledge. So I'm going to flip the camera around, and Lee's going to sit here, and I think we're talking crappie or wherever everybody else takes them. So if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments, and we'll try to get them to them. So without further ado.
Welcome everybody. I'm Mike Dillis, I'm your host of the seminar series here at the Alabama Fishing Show and Expo. Glad y'all came down today. Hope you're enjoying the show. Next seminar, if you guys crappie fish, you can't have a conversation without talking about Lee Pitts. Legend here in Alabama, crappie fishing. He's going to share everything he knows with you guys right
now. All right, thanks guys. Hey, just want to take a little time. You know, we got a smaller crowd in here, so what we're going to do, we're just going to kind of just bounce things back and forth, talk to one another, and hopefully I can mention some things that may help you in your crappie fishing to put a few more fish in the boat. Like I said, it's my name's Lee Pitts, and I guide on Weiss and Neely Henry. Spend most of my time in front of the crappie boat, sitting on it. So we're going to kind of start out by just going through the seasons of how we do. You know, you've got your early spring where the fish are not quite into the banks yet. And that's where our long line trolling, that'll be the first thing we're going to talk about with long lining. You know, I don't know if a lot of you are comfortable with it or have tried it. It's kind of a different technique that is not just your normal casting and retrieving, throwing it out there and just bringing it back in. We're setting up a multiple set on this. And so we're using several different rods. And what we're doing, we're trying to use the boat more or less, and I tell people this, use it like it's a dock that you're setting on. The fish aren't holding on anything this time of year. It's early spring. They're just starting to come out of the main lake. They're moving into some of the big bays and some of the creeks. They're not on your normal brush tops. They're not on the long points and places that you would throw a float or throw a jig to them. So what they're doing, they're just following bait. These fish are migrating back and forth. They're coming in, and a lot of times we may be fishing in 18, 20 foot of water, but the fish will get out there and suspend in your 6, 7 feet. So we're taking this long line trolling and throwing out the back of the boat, keeping the boat moving, so you're almost like it's a long cast, dragging that jig through there. I prefer the 124s, 16ths sometimes, some of the weights that I like to use. I don't want to overpower it with a real heavy weight, because I want my speeds to be slow enough that I'm not taking the bait away from these fish. What I'm looking for is the mouth of some of these bays that off your main tributaries, you know, that come in through there where the fish are moving off the main body of water, coming in, getting ready to spawn. That's the places I'm looking for. And what I do, I'm using my electronics a whole lot this time of year. My hummingbirds, I'm watching them. I spend a whole lot of time staring at these screens, because what I'm looking for is to see, a buddy of mine calls it the little rice scratches. When you see the wads and the piles of that, your bait's going to look more like a cloud. It's going to be a misty cloud. But then when you look at that and you're seeing the individual dots looking for those crappie, that's when you can learn and see what depth they're in, what they're doing. If they're moving on you, you can tell from that. And I like to set up, I use a couple of different approaches. I'll take some of my rods up front when I make my spread. The key to the long lining is if you can keep everything the same distance out back. When you throw them back there, keep all your lines the same distance. That helps when you turn. You don't have one line that's 10 feet, 12 feet farther than the other, so when you turn, it's going to tangle up with everything. If you'll keep those baits the same distance behind you, it'll help you with your turns. When you get a fish in and catch it, it's easier to get him in when you're watching those lines back through there. And that's what I'm looking at doing. Try to find the depth first, finding my fish. I like to stay with a 1/24th, a 16th. I feel like that helps in the water column. It's a more natural approach to it. Sometimes if they're deeper, if I'm in that deeper water and the fish are moving deeper, I may put a split shot maybe a foot higher above the bait. So that way you still got the action that bait gives you, because sometimes those fish, they'll run up and just take a swipe at that bait. If it's a heavy bait, you know, like an 8 or something like that, it's not gonna have much movement. But if he swipes at it, misses it, and in that water, when it moves it, it lets that bait flicker around and flop more natural like it's a minnow, he's gonna come back on it. So what I'm doing with this, I play with my colors daily. It's just one of those things. Most of the time I'll start out with whatever was hot the day before, but on those multiple rod systems, I like to use for my front, and I wish I had something to kind of diagram it a little bit for you right here, but the front of the boat, I'm gonna have my front holders with my longest rod. I like a 10, 12. I don't like to use anything. I know a lot of guys, they'll use those 16s. With me having clients in the boat all the time, they're not used to a 10-foot rod. I don't really like, you know, that's something that nobody is used to throwing. Everybody throws a 5, 6, 6.5-foot rod, but you put a 16-footer and he catches a crappie, first thing he's gonna do, pull it straight up, and then it's like you flying a flag. He's up there high and flapping in the wind. So it's one of those deals, but you know, I like to taper them down. I try to angle my front rods more on a 90 straight out, and then as I go back, my next rod may be a 8-footer, and I try to kind of keep them where they're staggered. So that way you're watching, and most of the time my guys, they're sitting with their back to the front of the boat, because you're looking back by the steering wheel when you're coming this way, so that's where your lines are. They're not in front of you, so it's so much easier to turn around where your back is at the, your back is at the front of the boat. So anyway, tapering that down and watching the lines that way you're covering more of the water column. You're not dragging the bait 6 inches from the other one, you're covering more of the water column, so you're kind of learning where the fish will stay, what they're doing. The back of the boat, I'm gonna have them more straight out, so that way when I come through a group of fish, I'm covering probably 30 feet of water or more when I'm coming through there. So that's kind of how I set things up. Another thing that I really like that's helped me with my long lining and even with my dock shooting, I like a high vis line. Vicious makes a good high vis line, Crappie Max at Bass Pro Shops. I like a 4 to 6 pound test when I'm pulling, because we're dealing with light baits. It's something that's, I can see it better, not only when you're throwing the lines out, but also I call them the troughs. When you keep them separated, you can see if you've got trash on that bait, because it may pull a different way. And like I said, I'm going through some things here, and we're going to open it up in a minute. If anybody's got any questions, we can talk about it. But just kind of telling you how I get started on this. And so then what I do with the back rods, I'm using a shorter pole with them, because you don't need to stretch them out farther. You can take a shorter pole in that back, and it's going to also allow you to handle that fish better where you're not tangling up as much. Anybody got any kind of questions or anything so far?
How fast do you usually move it when you're trolling?
Most of the time, I like to stay under a mile an hour. I may pick it up a little higher when it gets later in the spring and the fish moves shallow, and I want to keep that bait up off the bottom. You know, if I'm pulling stump rows or something like that, you know, it may be something that I have to speed it up some. A lot of times too, with my speed, it depends on what kind of bait I'm throwing. If you got something with a big swinger tail on it, curly tail, you may have to slow it down a little bit more. Like your Bobby Garlands and your slab slayers, baby shads, things like that, you can pick it up some, because there's not as much resistance in the water. So that's something too, with the different baits, you're gonna have different depths and different, you know, speeds you'll run. Come on in, man. All right, any other questions?
How you deal with that 20-mile-an-hour wind and try to stay under a mile?
How what now?
How you deal with that 20-mile-an-hour wind and try to stay under a mile?
Well, that's a good question, because that's what we had about the last month out there. Biggest thing is, do what you can. It's better than being at the house. You know, there's no there's no just, okay, here's what you do on that. I try to keep that boat into the wind best I can. Sometimes if I have to get up and run net a fish for somebody and that boat tilts and that wind catches you, best thing to do, reel them up and start again. And another thing with that question, oh yeah, try to get behind it. Going with the wind, a lot of times you can control that speed better, because if you turn it sometimes, it's going to push you through too fast. And I've had to, and like I said, you can't control it quite as good when that wind's blowing you faster than what you want to go. But you can turn that trolling motor. I'll take my Minn Kota and I'll turn it around and just kind of bump it to feather it. I may get up to 1.2 and have to hit it, slow it down, and you just got to play with it. Like I said, a lot of times it's either do that or do what you can. I've drug a 5-gallon bucket behind me, tie a rope to it, throw a bucket off the back, drag it. It's either do that or go home. So, it's one of those things where sometimes you just got to take what's given to you and just try to make it work, All right, anybody else got any questions on that? Come on now, I know you know how to catch them. He ain't quite figured it out yet? He's getting there. All right, but the biggest thing too with my colors, a lot of people say colors don't matter. It's kind of crazy that a lot of times I can go through with the same bait on 3 or 4 rods, same bait, same line, same everything, same distance back, and I'll have one that gets hit. It may have an orange head on it and the other ones have blue, or it may have a pink and the other one's got something else. But every day that color is going to change for me. Either the sunlight, cloud cover, or whatever it is something makes it a little bit different through there. So play with it. When you're out there and you got multiple rods out, don't be afraid to say, well, I'm going to do something crazy with this one. I'm going to put 2 BB split shot up here on it, because it looks like those fish are dropping down on me a little bit. Because sometimes even when the fish, if they get a little lower in the water column and they drop down, they still want that speed, to them. I've tried before playing with my Minn Kota. As I go through them and I see them if they're deeper, I may kill my speeds, let everything fall down a little bit, then bump my speeds up a little bit. It's kind of like a guy throwing a worm bass fishing, lets it sink down to the bottom, and then you pick it up kind of quick. So I'll play with it from time to time. I had a lady this last year, and the fish were real finicky. They didn't want to do anything. And I've got a bad habit, especially when the bite's slow. I'll stare at that hummingbird and I'll get to mumbling to myself, oh man, there's some fish right there. I see them, they're blah, blah, blah. And I had a group of 4 people out there. It was 2 couples. And one of the ladies, she would say, oh, here they come. Come on, babies, come on. And she would start beating the back end of that rod. And I'd say, ma'am, if you don't mind, don't do that, because they're finicky. And I'm trying to go into a spill, not just say don't do it. And about that time, that rod just wham. I'm like, oh, wow. Net it, get it in the boat. We go through again. Oh, yeah, here's some fish here. Come on, come on, come on. And all of a sudden, the rod goes down again. So I tell everybody, hey, when I see them, start beating on the ends of those rods. And she said, well, you told me not to do that. I said, well, you're the only one getting bit. So that goes to show whatever's working, keep on doing that. Those fish don't read a whole lot of the things that we read. And sometimes it's just that funny little bite, and whatever's working, just keep on doing it. Anything else? All right, so that was talking about some of them when they're out there in that open water, not around your brush, not holding on anything. As it gets later in the spring and these fish come in, they start migrating. They're coming in off the main lake, coming into these bays. You'll see them as that water temperature warms up, they'll start moving back to your secondary points. They'll start moving to some of the high spots and starting to kind of get more towards where they're wanting to get to. And it may be where you've got to cut angles on them across points a little bit, a little more. That's when I like to go to a lighter head. I still like to keep that same speed when I can, anywhere from right under a mile an hour to, like I said, if I get too shallow, I may have to pick it up. But changing more into the the baby shads and the slab slayers that don't have a whole lot of action to it, it's more of a tight little wiggle, they start getting where they want to be more aggressive and want to try to chase a little more. That's when I'll go to like that big stroller. You know, it's got a little bit bigger body size, a little bit more of a thump, and puts off a little vibration to it, and then start changing your baits a little bit then. One of the things, as it does get warmer, they start trying to get in position. These fish will get more aggressive. They'll like a little bigger bait, and they like a little bit more action to it too. So that's when I'm gonna play with it. Steel color's got a whole lot to do with it. But then I'm looking at more of trying to hit your longer tapering points, coming back in around some of your stumps and some of the backwaters. Stump may be 6, 7, 8 foot of water, but that's what I'm kind of looking for there. And another thing, then I may shorten those lines up a little bit so it's holding them up just a little bit higher, not making it. And another thing, I skipped this on the last, that distance you're putting that bait back there sometimes helps. If you got fish that have really been pressured, they can feel that ping off that depth finder on them, and you can see them starting to move on you when you come through it. If you'll let those lines get back a little bit further, you can still do your same presentation, still do the same thing that you were doing, but you'll start getting more bites on it because the fish have got just enough time to calm down just a little bit. And I know it sounds crazy, but me playing with them and doing, you know, out there every day, and a lot of times we got so much traffic around us that you got to do something a little different. Because where I'm from at home now, you get to know everybody pretty good because everybody's in the same spots, and it's how you doing, y'all catching them, you doing any good? So, you know, it's one of those things that you got to kind of figure something a little bit different out of. And one of the things that I've been doing here this last 2 or 3 weeks, our bite's been tough. It's been real finicky. You'll see fish, mark them for a little bit, make 2 passes on them, then they're gone. I've been playing with some scent, putting it on there. Bobby Garland's got the slab jam. You know, you got all kind of other stuff. Bass Pro Shop's got the crappie niblets. You got different stuff. Man showed me one day that they worked. This has been 15 years ago. We were getting short strikes. Rod tips would shake, nothing. Come through them, rod tips shake, nothing. And he told me, he said, "You don't have no crappie niblets?" I said, "I ain't got a clue what you're talking about. Don't know. I ain't never seen such." He said, "Oh man, you gotta have crappie niblets." He got to digging down in his bag, put 2 or 3 on there, looked like little marshmallows. I was like, I ain't playing with that stuff. We go through some fish. I said, "Oh, here they come." My rod shake, his double up. We did that about 4 times. I went and got me some crappie niblets. So it's little things to do, like scent. You know, if you can fool him not only with seeing it, fool him with a little vibration, but then he's got that smell and that taste too. Just try to put everything in your favor a little bit on there. So different stuff, playing with that will help. I know a lot of times if I go to doing the same thing and I'm seeing some other guys getting bit and I'm making pulls through the same fish and not, that's when you got to start trying to play and do different stuff. Lines out further, shorter. And sooner or later, you go through and the 2 rods that you're doing something different with, they get bit, that's when you can put a hurting on them. Anything, anybody? Come on now. I'm running out of something to say. Y'all gotta, but, all right. Then, when they really start the end of their seat, when they're coming in and they're locked down, they're trying to get on bed, they're getting on the wood cover, they're getting on these docks, that's when I like to swap over and take, you can throw a float on them, your open water, you can find these little, you know, your stumps, you go through it, the flats, fan cast with a float. I like to put them 3, 4, 5 foot deep, whatever it is. And then when you can find that, I'll take the smaller float. I don't like to throw a big old float on there. You got better feel. Something, those steel corks make a good one that pulls straight. You know, got a little spring load in there. That helps, but you can make some cast on them. Still in the open water. You know, most time it's that midday when they'll start getting on these treetops. When getting in the thick stuff and getting on the cover, you can do better casting around them. I kind of let my long line and I get away from that and start doing more casting and throwing to them. Then I go back to some of the smaller baits, some of your, like I said, the more baby shads, minnow minders, that kind of stuff. And what I do with that, because I'm not pulling it a long way to make that tail on your curly tails, make it swing, it's just more of a little twitch and a shake. And you can take those baits like that, they don't have a whole lot of action, but they got a great quiver to them. You know, you can put that thing under a float and throw it, pull it a foot and stop it. When you pull it, it's gonna come up like on a pendulum, fall back down. You hit it and shake it. If it falls in his face, he can't help it. He's gonna get a hold of it. But anything. Everybody's quiet. I must be doing good. Everybody's quiet. I'll go back to that baby shad. Baby shad or either a slab slayer, and water, if it's got a little bit of color to it, that monkey milk or a blue ice, bluegrass is what I go to. If I got some heavy stain, that black chartreuse, blue chartreuse. And most of the time an orange or a pink head is going to work good in stained water. That's what I like to throw in through there and trying on it. I have a lot of guys that'll tell me I'll put in the last 2 days I pulled pink and clear, pink and chartreuse with a pink head. We've had some stained water, and with that pollen coming in, it's kind of had a funny look to it. And some guys yesterday, they was like, okay, what's the joke? You know, you got pink on everything, what's the joke? I said, that's what they're eating. So, you know, if they're eating, I'll drag a hot dog weenie if that's what they want. It don't matter to me, you know. So, but that's that's kind of my go-to, you know, when nothing else is working. I've got confidence in that, and I'll stay with it. Anything else, anybody? I'm gonna let everybody get on back then and get to the show out there. I hope maybe, I know I was scattered, but I hope that I had a little bit of something that may help you catch a few more fish and everything go good on that. Yeah. I will. A lot of what I do, I've got multiple people in the boat with me. That is a great way to catch them, tight line with that longer rod and jigging in there with it when they get real thick in that cover and you can't throw. I like to take, like I'm shooting docks, I'll take that jig with a shorter rod and skip it across it. You got to be coming out with it more, but something about that, when you skip that jig and that it's going to make them look up, because they'll hear and see that disturbance in the water. And a lot of times them just looking up to see it and that bait falling in their face helps. But I do like I said, when they get tight in that cover, either skipping it or take a long rod and shaking it. That way when you hit him, you coming straight up with it. You know, you don't want him to run around in there, and you want him to come on up and come out of it. Anything else?
How long does it take a female to go up and lay her eggs and look like that?
A lot of it's depending on weather. If it gets right and with the weather, you're not looking at a whole long, you know, maybe a week to get in there, but the whole process from her migrating and getting back there to it, and a lot of times they won't leave. If it doesn't just get blistering hot, they'll stay back in there in that cover for a couple of weeks. The majority of them, they'll come back out and try to get on these dock poles once they've done that, once they've laid their eggs and done their thing, they'll come back out and get in that shade on these docks and just kind of sit and heel up and feet up and do that. That's what that dock shooting really, really helps on that.
How long does it take an egg to hatch before they try?
It's going to be, I'd say a week, few days, something like that. You know, and that's when it gets right, when they go in there and they nest and they do their thing. So it's not, like I said, it's not a long process.
Lay out in major water?
Yeah. If they've got enough sunlight that they can have sunlight come through there, that's the thing that we worry about right now at home. We've got typically stained water. Neely, Weiss is stained, and you need that water to stay at a constant level. And we've had so much rain here, like some of these fish, I was finding mid-60s in the back of these bays. So some of these fish may go in there and drop their eggs, okay? Then they're getting ready for these rains, they pull a foot of water off of it. It may kill all that. Or they raise it up 2 foot and they can't get enough sunlight through it. It may kill that. So It's just some of those things, weather, water levels, and things like that have a lot to do with it. And we like for it to kind of, when it gets that April, if it can not just get summertime, that'll prolong our whole spring. But if they get in there and some of them are getting ready and it gets hot in summertime, they'll drop those eggs that quick and get gone. You know, they may not hang around. It may just be, I've gotten here, I'm gonna beat around on this brush, drop my eggs, and I'm gone. So we hope it just doesn't get July in late April. So, yeah, and we've had that happen, and it's a short spring. You know, it's a short spring season. Well, all right. Well, thank y'all for listening to me and bearing with me. I hope I've helped you with some ideas that may help you catch a few more crappie. I appreciate it. Thank y'all. All right. Thank you, man. Appreciate that. Hope I didn't ramble too much. Thank you. Well, thank you. I appreciate you coming. I don't know who they got set up next for y'all.
I have no idea.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I do. Yeah.
When you're out, to get out on Weiss, we live over in Georgia.
Okay.
We wanted to come over to Weiss and
I got something here with them.
do some fishing over there.
Let me. There we go. I had something written on that other one.
Appreciate it,
Thank
sir.
you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, man.
All right, for those of you that are still with us on the internet, hope you got some out of that. I made a little lunch run, so I got the food trucks out there. I'm gonna shut this off, and I think we got Wes Logan coming up next. So we'll be back with you here shortly.